How to protect our strategic cultural activa and assets. This is crucial. Of course, a foreign investment fund may get a hold on European companies, buy up different cinemas within the works, etc. What are the solutions? We will talk about that during our first roundtable. We have 5 or 6 experts. Christian Braüer is the president of the International Confederation of Art Cinemas. Odile Limpach, professor at the Technological University of Cologne. We also have Petar, Mitric, assistant professor at the University of Copenhagen. Olivier, Henrard, delegated general director for the National Center for Cinema and Animated Films. Chiara, Sbarigia is the president of Cinecittà. She is in Rome. And Sidonie, Dumas, president of the Gaumont movie theaters. Pascal Rogard, you are the general manager of the Société d'auteurs, compositeurs, dramatiques. It's a copyright company. And you have the floor. Well, thank you very much. This year is extraordinary. We have different European countries represented around this table, and this is really good news. I would like to thank Rosine Bachelot as well as our European Commissioner, because this SMA directive is particularly important. And thanks to the efforts of all, the CNC, but also the ministry, have come up with regulations and an obligation to comply, which is particularly severe. Well, look at the Cressman and get inspired by that. The Swiss film had created the 4%, but then the popular referendums was organized to and questioned that. So democracy is not systematically the best way to handle that. Anyway, thank you very much for this debate. So the question which is raised has been raised very well by our minister. It is how to protect our cultural assets. What you can observe is that as regards the creation, Europe is particularly strong. We have powerful programs in Europe. We have a lot of those programs which are being watched. We have a public service which is well financed. We have an industry of video games which is quite solid. However, as regards the broadcasting platforms, internet, new media, etc., we observe that the international platforms are all American. So the danger, as already mentioned by our ministers, is that when you do not control the broadcasting tools, it may have consequences on the creation itself, on the creative process. So we need to protect from ambitions which may come from the USA, but also other countries like China, for instance, who are less respectful of our creation freedom or expression freedom. So to start with this debate, I have asked the best, the high specialist to start. Olivier, Henrard, General Director, as I said, of this CNC, where we are at present, National Center for Cinema and Animated Film. So what our new directive is not an absolute protection. When Olivier started working on this text with the ministry, he was confronted with the legal rules and provisions. So, but Olivier is going to tell us more about what has been done, what has been achieved, and what should be maybe modified within the European rules to come up with a stronger protection of our European assets. Thank you very much, Pascal, and hello, everybody. Indeed, we have to solve a legal challenge. It's quite complex within the European Union, believe me. So maybe, first of all, let's move back. When we talk about strategic cultural assets, what do we mean by that? The first thing that comes to mind first of all, the work itself, I mean, the catalogs of films, telefilm series, but it's also what is upstream, production companies, independent, as well as studios where those pieces of work, of art are being made. And then and then also to the downstream, which is the movie theaters, because as regards the Hertzian channels, they have a specific regulation. However, it is extremely old, but it has been kept. So we will talk about that later on. So the scope of what we of cultural assets is that the different things I quoted. Now, what is at stake? Different things. First challenge, those assets have been created thanks to a part of public money, at least for France. Public money, that's the financial support of CNC, quite important, I must say, but also the tax credit. Since 7, 8 years, it represents something important. It's not as important as the direct support, financial support of the CNC, but it helps. And then it is a more recent phenomenon, but France is going to invest 600 million euros in the production tool. That's equipment, but also training. So here again, assets which have been made possible thanks to public money. Then we have the economic challenge. I mean, it's so obvious that I do not have to talk about it. There is a direct economic burden, direct one, an indirect one, because the image, as old as the world, image is really the start of international trade in other fields than culture, by the way. I mean, the trade follows the film. That's what the Americans say. And by defending the cultural assets, we also defend the French way of life, if I may say, as well as the whole trade of French goods in a way. And then the third challenge of those of what or in along that goes along with the cultural asset, that's the image of a society. So you need to protect it because it reflects, I mean, cinema works does reflect the country where it has been made. So what we observe from a structural point of view is that we are facing a risk. It started before COVID. We have a concentration phenomenon, which is true for the whole world, but also because this industry of image is in a full development phase and needs more capital. So concentration and need for funds or capital, that generates risk that go along with attempts to take over. So whenever a company is in a difficult situation, it becomes cheaper and it's easier to buy it up. So this is the risk that we face. And it's not only a theoretical risk. We talk about movie-making places, video games, etc. We have observed, not only in France, but in Europe, takeovers which were quite important. And the last kind of buy-up that I think of, studios, cinemas, etc., that's the content, that's the portfolio, the catalog. This is what has caught our attention, because the risk is not only about taking over control. The risk is also linked to, well, to the integrity which is threatened. integrity of our catalog. I mean, titles are variables. I mean, you have some pieces and works which are immediately profitable. You have some others which are less immediately profitable. So, I mean, if you buy up and if you decide to go only for the hits and the top of the pop, then you will probably sort out within this catalog and you will get rid of what is not immediately profitable. So, this is something that we cannot accept. This is why the very first thing we have been thinking of is the one of the catalogue with this law of the 25th October 2021. It is not a blocking mechanisms that we have set up, but it is a kind of emergency tone that rings. The producer, French producer of an audiovisual work is supposed to look for the dissemination possibilities. I mean, as long as you're French, it's okay. But the mechanism that we have imagined consists in transferring on the extra-European buyer, the one who is not submitted to this follow-up dissemination, to submit the same rules. Submit this buyer to the same rules. So whenever you buy a work, you also need to look for the dissemination and the marketing of this piece of work. This has become compulsory, which means that the public authorities have to be called upon 6 months before the buying up, and this leaves time for the CNC, the Ministry of Culture, and if possible, a commission that has been organized with experts and professionals to look and to examine and to investigate about this buyer to be sure that there is a legal, financial, technical possibility for this buyer to to fulfill the intentions. Positive intentions, of course. And if not, then we may oblige this buyer to comply with our rules, which means, in other words, to set up a certain number of things which are necessary for us to be sure that the dissemination of and broadcasting of this piece of work is going to be guaranteed. So the State Council is examining this law, and we hope that it will go back to the ministry before end of February, and then being adopted and accepted. So this is really something which is particularly important for us. Why can't you go beyond? Well, we can't go beyond because the free movement of capital in Europe is special, and it's not the case for all the liberty and the freedoms, but it means that within the European market, it means that a Chinese company may claim for the free circulation of capital within the European Union as any other European country or member country. And there is no derogation to this possibility except in very, very special cases. I'm going to sum it up. The two major exceptions to that well, one is not applying to cultural possibilities anymore, which is, well, the barriers that we had at the Maastricht time were consolidated, and it means that the companies, radio, media support, etc., or even the written press can't be controlled for more than 20% by a foreign owner, company or person out of France. I mean foreign, not French. Moreover, we also have a rule that lists up a certain number of sectors where member states are obliged to filter the investment, the direct foreign investments. So far, we only have within this list sectors who are directly in link with public safety, national defense, so nothing that has to do with cultural purposes or even sovereignty in link with cultural strategic affairs. Thank you very much.
If I remember correctly, that transfer of risk took place when an Italian businessman, Giancarlo Parotti, bought MGM and bought Pathé and wanted to transfer MGM and its catalog, the most prestigious catalog, in France. Luckily, it all went well, since Pathé was bought by Jérôme Sédou. At the time, we examined the possibility of countering that deal, because we all knew that he was a crook, and we had no legal means of action. Well, it's an interesting case since then. It was already complicated at the time, but it has become even more complicated. To prevent the exit of physical assets from the national territory, we have laws. We can classify as a historical monument an asset, and that is what was done with a part of the Pathé catalogue with the historical archives. So the government classified the film. It was just a small part of the assets, of course, but that was a way for the public authority to express its disapproval with the operation. Unfortunately, we no longer have that possibility because you have catalogs that are no longer materialized today. These are intangible assets, essentially. So there are problems with managing reels that is secondary. It was less of an issue 30 years ago. So when it comes to a control over the circulation of assets, that has not been increased. Quite the opposite. And this is why we must contemplate legislative action. Now, let us move on to another sector with even more revenue than the cinema. And a few days ago, there was a huge financial deal in the video industry with Microsoft, one of the biggest companies in the world, that bought out a very large company, Blizzard, I believe, in the video game sector, and Odile Limpach. You worked in the video game sector and you still work in that area. I would like to know, from your perspective, the issue that has been raised by the French government before the European partnership, can it be dealt with for the video gaming sector? Thank you. This is really a burning issue. I think we need to set the context to know exactly what we're talking about and what the European video game industry is about and how large it is. Video game, strong growth, an average of 10% growth per year. The pandemic increased growth last year because people stayed at home and played a lot. The pandemic also generated problems for the video gaming in Europe and elsewhere. Production delays are seen today because even in a digital native industry, with the lockdown, when you have 300 or 400 people working on a game and getting that organized, you are deeply impacted. When you talk about video gaming, it's not only about games that are developed. We're talking about the whole ecosystem of technologies, esports that was impacted in recent years. Over the past 2 years, all the major events were cancelled. And also business development and conferences. But there's a lot of talk about huge amounts. To give you an idea, in 2021, The video gaming market was about $75 billion worldwide, and Europe accounted for 13%. That's not bad, 13%. We're amongst the biggest markets. Looking now at the top 100 video games. In 2020, there were only 12 European companies among the top 100 video games. Altogether, these 12 companies accounted for only 13.8% of the top 100. A company like Electronic Arts, a major European company in 2020, accounted for 25% more revenue than the 12 companies altogether at European level. So when you talk about the European Union and European companies, we're talking about small and medium-sized companies in our ecosystem, rather than the huge companies in China or the United States. The important thing about video games is that this industry evolves very swiftly. Video games have, especially with the pandemic, we have talked about new social media. They replace the school bench, parties with your pals. Even today, it's not easy to go out. So you meet, you go together to play a game, and also to speak and to watch a movie or to do other things, to watch a premiere, for example. So the communities are very important. Can we talk about European values or European culture of video gaming? I think so. But I think we still have a lot to do because we're a young industry. We need to define what it means. I spoke about the community because these communities are very international. When you develop a game, you think straight away about the international market. A game developer, to be successful, will immediately try to sell his game everywhere because today, natural distribution is via the internet, giving you access to a global audience straight away. But I believe that there are European values, there are European tastes. There's a European touch, French or German, in video gaming. But I think it's more difficult to measure, leading me to a first problem when you speak about European values and how to protect them, to know exactly what it means, because we have very little access to data. Is it because distribution platforms are all in other countries? That plays a role. But either you are a very large company and you can afford a research department for the market and you know what's going on, or you are a small and medium-sized company and it's very complicated to know how or where the game will be sold. What are the advantages of localization and translating into all languages? So the first problem is access to data for all producers. We're talking about small and medium-sized producers as well, and there too, it's all about innovation. I like your approach, not only thinking about catalogs, because in video gaming, a video gaming catalog, that's not easy to leave it accessible to the audience. The first PlayStation, came out over 20 years ago. If you want to play a very well-known French game, Rayman, on a PlayStation, you're lucky. You still have a PlayStation in your basement that has not yet been destroyed, or you can't play. We are dependent on the technology. The technology evolves so swiftly that all the gaming catalogs that are still in operation, these games are economically viable. So even the current European producers only use the catalog that can give a positive economic benefit. I worked a lot for Ubisoft in Germany, and the game has been around for 30 years and it is still profitable, so we continue. It's not like 30 years ago because the game evolves a lot, but how can we protect our old catalog? In Berlin, I know the Computer Spiel Museum, which is wonderful, and that seeks to preserve these values. I think that in most small and medium-sized companies, we'll still need to make an effort and protect these catalogs and these assets that are not always accessible to everyone, but that are also a part of our cultural values. Are we talking about commercial or cultural challenges? I think we're talking more about protecting producers and the force of innovation. We have a lot of startups. Innovation comes from diversity and the young people, for sure. So this is where we need to really make an effort. Now, I was trying to think of what are the obstacles for video games today for us to be stronger, because I believe that it is by having a strong ecosystem that you can protect yourselves from being bought out. Now, we don't have a lot of unicorns in Europe. Public and private capital is less bold when it comes to taking a risk with new companies. Over the past 15 years, we have seen many video game brands that were created in Europe, blockbusters, and it was more, they were taken over quickly by foreign capital, non-European capital. So there is an issue there with the financial markets. Now, how to be strong in Europe as well? I am French. I live in Germany. I work with people from many European countries. Now, regulations, we try to have European co-productions. It's not so simple with so many different countries and regulations. So these are different aspects that we could discuss later on. Thank you so much. I have an idea for you. You spoke about the lack of market transparency. The minister said a few words about it. You could do what was done by the European Parliament in the copyright directive, the obligation for platforms to pass data on to you, because that was the difficulty. I didn't have any difficulty as the head of a company, because in my contract I required having a certain number of views, but many small or medium-sized producers couldn't get that from the major platforms. So that was done in the directive and transposed even beyond that in French legislation. But that applies to conventional copyright. It could also be applied to video games. Let's move on to another sector, which is highly appraised in France. I'm speaking about exhibiting movies with Christian Braüer, president of CICAE, Christian Braüer. You're part of a European program that I love. I was an expert in that program for 15 years. And we saw Europa Cinema, at a program that is there to urge movie theaters to exhibit non-national movies. That's very important for the circulation of European cinema in movie theaters. How do you deal with that topic? And as a matter of fact, have you heard about this before you came here? Maybe not. And for movie theaters, do you believe that there's something to be done? Because there can also be risks of acquisitions of major theaters by extra-European groups. Thank you so much. I will be speaking in German. Otherwise, I will speak in English as you prefer. In German or in English? In German. Okay, fine. That's what I was asked to do. So thank you so much. Thank you, the CNC, the French Ministry of Culture, for this forum and your invitation. When you look at the title of this forum, it shows the challenge we are facing. How can we protect our independence and cultural diversity? I like France's approach in this area, so I thank you. I commend you for yesterday's agreement that was signed to say that cultural diversity requires both creating cultural works and also transparency, visibility, making the infrastructure visible, be it for cinema or via digital means. Getting down to the nitty-gritty, I'm also Director General of Europe Cinema, a network we've been taking part in from the very beginning. It's a major initiative at European level. When you think of the future, I think we need more cooperation of this sort at international level, and not just horizontally, but vertically. So what is the situation for movie theaters? I think we all know. Unfortunately, we're still facing a pandemic, even though we still hope. With the vaccinated, with booster shots, we'll be coming to the end of the pandemic, but we're still facing difficulties. And all this cultural infrastructure is being impoverished. But the market still continues for cinema, even though cinemas are closed. The market is still alive. Some of the players are benefiting from it, especially those that can propose digital offerings. Now we have a world that existed already before the pandemic, a world of monopolization. When you think of the major groups like Apple, Amazon, Google, and it's a world
kleine Unternehmen kaufen, große
that the major groups are buying small companies. That has always existed. And this is a world where the major groups are buying large companies, studios buy other companies, channels buying out other channels that already existed before the pandemic. And we all know that when you have participants on the market with billions of dollars, they will be buying out smaller companies. In Germany, you no longer have national companies. They're all owned by major international groups. There were some requirements made by the competition, the antitrust authorities in Germany, but this is a trend we're seeing everywhere. So that's it for buyouts. And then we have dumping in prices when you have major companies proposing movie tickets at prices that others couldn't afford. That means that the smaller movie theaters will disappear. Also changes in business relations. Yesterday, there was a new agreement signed in France, but when you think of the major cinema groups, what we call the majors, the small movie theaters are now weaker at international and global level because movie theaters are still closed in most regions, and small movie theaters have to deal with social distancing rules and can sell all their seats. The audience has become scared of going to the movies, and movie theaters can no longer propose the same thing as before. And the major groups are benefiting from that. For example, if a small movie theater cannot propose different movies in a single day, that will leave room for the major European groups. And these are the problems we're facing with this new paradigm. And then societal changes that will be covered this afternoon. The more and more minorities no longer accept the fact of not being shown, and the young generation expect us to have that responsibility. The German interpreter is saying that there's a problem with the sound, a lot of echo. So we note that small movie theaters are facing more and more financial problems. The German interpreter is saying the sound is very bad, she can't continue. Okay, she continues. So there is an impact on global platforms, and we note that that is to the disadvantage of independent European cinema. Some things have not changed, though. the movie experience. You're all in a dark room, and you're watching a story that has been well portrayed. And people love stories. It makes me optimistic because we've always loved stories. It's a part of our DNA to see, to watch stories, and to talk about stories. And that's what the cinema allows us to do. That won't change. The role of the cinema has not changed. We are extremely important when it comes to diversity in cinema. When I look at all of these festivals in Cannes, Angers, the German interpreter is sorry about the echo once again. And when you look at the economic importance of movie theaters have an advantage. We're an analog space in a digital era. This is why cinema plays an important role. We must reconquer that space. It is important for democracy. This means two things for me. Over the short term, it is clear that we must mitigate the impacts of the pandemic, and we need a sort of structural fund to recreate spaces to make them competitive once again. And here we're talking about regulations. Competitiveness, being competitive, taking into account cultural spaces. It's all about data transparency, protecting these spaces, lending financial support, maybe a more holistic approach. I'm not just thinking about production, but also taking into account this transformation, digitization, calling for a true digital strategy. We must therefore invest in this development that it's all about marketing, but we must work on that, be it in Angers, Paris, or elsewhere. I'm referring to small movie theaters in contact with the audience, and you must keep it open and diverse, and that is what is important. The third step would be innovation and transforming business models to see how we can benefit from the time that is allotted. If we use this opportunity, it is a unique opportunity. It is now that we must plan for our future and to see if the pandemic will remain negative or will it be an opportunity. Let us keep our eyes open and face this challenge, hoping that it will all go well. Thank you, Christian, for that wonderful and appropriate defense of movie theaters. I believe the best place to watch a movie is in a movie theater, irrespective of the platforms. And you're right to say that the CNC did that in France, but we need to help movie theaters because this is a sector with living spectacles that has been the most affected by the pandemic with all the lockdowns. In Angers, you have a lot of people, rest reassured, lots of people in the movie theaters to see the first European movies. That is for sure, as the mayor of Angers said, the young people, extraordinary. It's a bit more complicated in a video conference because normally we should be in liaison with Roma, with Chiara Sbarigia, the chairperson of Cinecittà, and who should tell us about the studio and the industry. I hope it is working.
Good morning, everyone. I have a long professional experience with Italian independent audiovisual producers, having worked for the main trade association for 27 years, APA, as well as in the board of the Coordination of Independent Producers. And I currently hold the position of president of Cinecittà, a company owned by the Ministry of the Treasury under the control of the Ministry of Culture. Why I'm saying this? Because from the double perspective, from the independent industry on one side and from a company with a public purpose on the other side, I easily understand that to protect our national and European content, we must act to several fronts at the meantime. To protect our contents, we have to consider the whole environment, as indeed has been represented in many opinion and documents before. Cinecittà, in all its branches, like studios, film libraries, and experimental center, is already considered by Italy as a strategic asset, such that is at the center of an unprecedented investment. This is to ensure that foreign direct investment is managed instead of being endured. It is the state that invests in the way, creating the condition to preserve and enhance a strategic asset like Cinecittà, so that it becomes the pivot and the strong point of the audiovisual industry in Italy. Cinecittà, to me, can be taken as an excellent example because Cinecittà, in all its branches, has been put under protection with a strategic investment by the government that is generating positive and aggregating effects on the entire industry. The 2002-2006 Industrial and Cultural Plan of Cinecittà includes, obviously, the education for young people, not only in the field of restoration and digitization, but also both in traditional professions and on new careers in the sector. These are activities that we intend to carry out as much as possible in synergy with the National Cinema School, the National Cinema Center, with whose presidency have begun a deep and systematic dialogue. We must not leave film schools alone. It is necessary to work together with public institutions like ours, with trade association, national broadcaster and trade union representative, in order to establish clear and European shared rules of entry into the job market, also modernizing institutions such as apprenticeships. With specific reference to the studios that you asked me to say something, we are gaining traction with a rise in occupancy of its sound stages and backlot, realistic prospects for profitability, and new state-of-the-art filming facilities on the way. Our mandate is to turn the iconic Rome studios into continental Europe's top filming facilities, thanks to 300 million investment from the European Union's post-pandemic recovery fund. As for the revamp of Cinecittà filming facilities, we are building new sound stages, 2 of which will be more 3,000 square meters, etc., etc. For 2023, roughly 80% of available space is already booked. So I think we need a radical change in the mentality of the players involved. An efficient operation is needed between the 3 points of the impact economy triangle: public, private, and private social. A synchronized advancement of the attitudes of everyone. Thank you.
You have chosen the most radical way to protect the assets in Italy, that's nationalization. Olivier, have you something to suggest? Not so far, no, not yet, but maybe one day. Now I would like to turn over to Sidonie Dumas. She is the general manager of and director of Gaumont. Gaumont is one of, well, it is the most prestigious in terms of cinema, with a film catalogue which is really extraordinary. Gaumont really has a hold on it, and they look after it, and they have digitalized all that. So you are also present on TV channels as well as platforms, etc. Gaumont got centered back to the broadcasting, because the movie theaters themselves are held by Pathé more now. So I would like to know how you came about to take this initiatives that maybe hindered you in terms of freedom of movement, but Gaumont is totally controlled. Yes. we are controlled completely by our president, that's for sure. I'm very happy to be with you today. Gaumont is one of the most ancient societies of cinema in the world, so we are particularly proud to be here and to have survived and to have a prestigious catalogue. When we heard about this initiative and this new law, October 21, I can't say that we got the goosebumps, but, in a way, yes, we were surprised because particularly important to protect our heritage, the assets, the pieces of work. That's what we already do at Gaumont anyway. But we thought that should someone got interested in the work or the content of our catalogues, then the company would have financial problems, or that it would mean that we have problems. So this is not something that we wish. So we thought that protection is to be brought in thanks to restoration, etc. And we should not wait. It's a kind of prevention possibility instead of being obliged to sell off the catalogue. So to keep this heritage, to preserve it, to keep it together, we decided that it is the job of the CNC and other authorities to help us out with this restoration work. We have we had the feeling that the CNC was more dedicated to recent works than to heritage. So what is the budget of the CNC which is dedicated to the restoration of heritage work? I think that no country has wants to sell off and to dismantle the catalogue. We all love it and we care about it, but we need a little bit more support and help. We need to be encouraged to do all that. So it's the way we stock, the way we keep, and those works, which is at stake. It is the sustainability is important. On this support 35, the technological aspect, etc., is much more important than to get focused exclusively on whether the catalogue is on sale or not. I mean, it is important to understand what lies behind that, but I think that before coming as far as that, we need to work upstream. We have important people in this room really defending the catalogues, being film lovers, and they will do whatever they can do to protect them, to avoid having them being sold to any kind of company in the world. Yeah, but at Gaumont, you had a kind of last-minute guest within your capital, even if it's a very small one. Yes, indeed. But since we left the movie theaters and the activity, we decided also to get rid, well, in a friendly way, of our last-minute guests. Yes, there are two different things here. You have the restoration and protection of works, but the CNC and the Ministry of Culture really have decided to take a major step for protecting the heritage. It is a kind of double protection for works which are older than 30 years old. They decided to double the price for it. Instead of paying 100, they pay 200. So it is an invitation to broadcast older films, and it is also interesting for you. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was not talking about that. I was talking about buying up catalogues. But as regards the broadcasting of film, It's the job which has been done is really important, because the broadcasting of old films is fantastic. Plus, it participates to education and training. When you have a catalog, you have to bring it alive, which means that people have to watch it, and you have to advertise about it. You have to talk about it and to say how and where this film comes from and how it was created, etc. So this. Having the possibility for others to buy it, and to buy it for more money, this is of course important. And then you also profited by the pandemic, didn't you? I mean, it's a joke, but not so much, because you had the possibility to broadcast the heritage films on the public network. Yes, and this is why we talk about, well, speaking about platforms is one thing, but the important thing is also the capacity to show those films on screens. At a time where we could not shoot anymore, where we couldn't do anything anymore, I mean, the different channels had nothing to broadcast anymore. They had no entertainment programs, live, etc. And they looked at us and came to us to dig into the catalog, and that was wonderful. So we could not put them in theaters, the films, but we could hand them over to the channels, TV channels, and that was great for the whole cinema industry and movie lovers, etc. Well, hopefully this is going to go on, because we see that in France we now have a cinema policy which is much more ambitious. Yes, I could speak about Arte at the European level. They have an editing policy which is extremely strong and extremely qualitative. So I think, I mean, you see this the mix of this offer of different genres is really rich, and hopefully we will have more explanations like the explanations we had before, you know, a long time ago, to explain where it comes from, etc. Maybe we have a lack of programs dedicating to the movie industry. Yes, it's true. We have promotion, which is being done, dedicated to specific films, but not so much to the cinema in its whole. It's true that we have the Cine Club and things like that, but it would be worth the thing just talking about, again, the historical development of the industry. Now, Peter Mitric is professor at the University of Copenhagen, but you're also participating in the production. And I would like to know what you understand from this debate. What about the French initiatives? Do you think it's positive? Do you think that it has to be improved? Do you have proposals to make to Olivier Henrard? You know, he's the one writing a lot. Sometimes he takes a lot of time to write because it is time-consuming. But what do you perceive from our discussions?
Switch to English now. Yeah, it's great to hear all these initiatives about protecting cultural assets. But what is my impression is that debates today and debates around this are focused maybe too much on external enemy, on these evil people who come to buy our cultural assets in Europe. But what I found out, me and my colleagues in our two research projects, one in Czech Republic and one based in Sweden, where we interviewed around 1,000 film professionals all over Europe, is that there are also internal problems within Europe. And when I say internal, I mean that there is still huge discrepancy between countries like France and Germany and small European countries who are really affected by the crisis and by the arrival of big platforms. And there is also difference between experienced established producers and emerging producers, whereas established ones have good relationship with public film funds and sort of stability and predictability, whereas we have a huge class of precarious younger producers who are desperate, especially now during the pandemic and after pandemic. So yeah, they see, for example, platforms and these external players as saviors in one way, and they they are willing to sell them their catalogs and their cultural assets or to work for them as service producers because they see it as a quick fix for their problems, for their companies and for their employees. They don't see long-term negative impact of this. And there are instruments like AVMSD and Article 13. So within our research project, we analyzed the impact so far because it's been 2-3 years. It's already enough to measure impact in a way. And we can see that the impact is limited to big countries like Italy, France, and Germany, the countries that with or without AVMSD had these protection initiatives. AVMSD just confirmed it. But in small countries, the effect is really, really limited. And when talking to people from small European countries, we realized that AVMSD and similar laws that are coming, that we are discussing today, should be more sophisticated in the sense that they should empower local industry, local policymakers, all local stakeholders in small countries, stakeholders who are advocating cultural diversity, to have stronger negotiating position. I can give you a concrete example. For example, Article 13 of AVMSD provides mandatory quota of 30%. But in small countries, they have no negotiating power to make this quota qualitative, not just quantitative. When I say qualitative, that they require that there are also local national works, not just European works included in this quota. So we have small country catalogs that include only French and Spanish shows, and that already counts as European. The same way is about definition of independent producer, of European work, and so on and so forth. So I think what were our conclusions is that there should be more communication between experts in big and small countries, so that they can educate both local producers how to negotiate, how to learn how to share risks with platforms when they work with them and have more creative and financial power, but also to stakeholders of all kinds, politicians who should not be scared of negotiating with platforms and putting like requirements a little bit higher than they are now. Yeah, so those would be the main findings, and I feel like representing small countries here, as I come from Serbia and live in Denmark, which are both small countries in terms of population. So I just thought it was relevant to draw attention to this issue.
Alors, je vais vous répondre. Hein. Attendez, j'attends que vous mettiez votre...
Okay. I think that, well, you say that the SMA directive is not necessarily adapted for small countries. You are right in terms of the quota dedicated to the work. I mean, the pieces of work. It's we do have a lot of British, pieces of work, etc., despite the fact that they are not part of the EU anymore, etc. But in terms of production, in investment, you have the possibility to integrate limits. You have the language obligation, for instance, and to the contrary to strategic cultural assets, it is protected by the European Union because there is a so-called Barroso, who was the president of the European Commission and who signed the UNESCO Convention on the European culture, and it protects the linguistic identity, which is the linguistic quota, and this has been confirmed by the European Code of Justice. So this directive is a tool that you may very well use in small countries to produce works in the national language. The Swiss could write down Swiss. We do not have the right to put French because they are out of the European Union. But you should promote this pedagogical tool for small countries. Linguistic obligation, it is a very important tool. And thus it would not profit only to big countries, you see? Get your point, and it's a
useful tool, but I somehow got impression that it's not enough in small countries, because all these tools, they enable local policymakers to impose linguistic and cultural requirements on platforms. But I think the fear of making those platforms run away from the local markets is stronger than the power that these conventions and declarations give to them. So I believe that despite everything, and it seems according to our research results that it's still not happening in many countries, because when you talk to policymakers from small countries, they say that they are aware that the investment percentage is too small, that they introduced in their media laws now, that quotas are too quantitative, not qualitative enough, but they just shrug their shoulders and say that before more stringent and more sophisticated tools come from the European Union and empower them in that way, they are not powerful enough themselves to do that. And also local producers are not aware of this. They just want to work with platforms. They see it as a great business model that can fill the holes that they have now due to the crisis. So they need to get more awareness from their maybe senior colleagues or experienced French producers what keeping IP rights mean and what are the long-term consequences for the development of their own companies, but also for the entire ecosystem.
Merci, mais vous avez raison, les plateformes.
Thank you. You're right. I mean, platforms are not necessarily enemies. What we regret is that the big platforms, which have changed the audiovisual representation in Europe, are all American. This is the problem. We do not have an international platform that would be European. And this is the problem. I mean, this is why we are pushing this idea of having a European platform in order for Europeans not to be obliged to sell off their production to this American platform, their national catalog. This is at stake. It is important to be there, to be still broadcasters, I mean nationals. Odile, Limpach, do you have something to add on that? Or because the video game, I mean, this is very interesting. I do not play video games, but I go to watch movies in a theater. But I mean, video games seems to be particularly attractive for young people. They forget about school. Yes. Yes, we always bear a certain responsibility as an industry. We always have to talk about the time that the time that should limit it. The parents have these responsibilities, and also the industry, to create games that should not be too much of addictive. When we were young, it used to be the restriction on TV watching. Now it is video games. Anyway. What I would like is we are lucky with the video games. We profit from new technologies and innovation being based on diversity. So to be positive within this debate, we are lucky within Europe to have this diversity, to profit from that, to be able to create. And those young people and less young people creating startups, being innovative and creative, etc. That's interesting. So it is interesting to orient the debate more, to move away from protection and to talk about reinforcement. Like Sidonie said, we don't need to be interesting and attractive to others for us to be bought up. I mean, we are. It's sometimes also interesting to have to have more means from outside when we're looking for that, or when we're looking for an economic reinforcement. I also teach economy to game designers, artists, creators, etc. Sometimes they really have problems to understand why I'm there. And then by the end, they understand that when you play yourself a strategic game, you become a specialist of economy. Why not? And that there are a certain number of things which are possible on this market. So we work with SpielFabrique in many European countries. Young people still need to go, to become professionals. And it's obvious that the marketing is a job. It is a real job, and it takes time to learn how to do it. And then what the CNC is already doing with the video games, and I can only encourage that to become more important, is to encourage the financing of production, because you take a lot of risks when you make a video game. If we had more data, I mean, you never know exactly whether it's going to be successful or not. So you have to take the risk and go. In Germany, it's interesting to work in that field. Croatia, I mean, in Italy also, they have started to really think about it and to get a little bit more efficient in terms, and to reinforce public help and public support is important for the video game industry. And those products need to be a marketing success, and maybe private investors should be more reluctant to get into this business. We see that now we have more and more of those private initiatives which are taken. There are European initiatives in terms of funds which are being taken, guarantees also to be a little bit more risk-loving. Those are the things that we should work on in the future to reinforce this industry in order of too much protected. I mean, again, video game industry is very international, diversified, and interesting, and I really have problems to stick to this European context. I understand that you are pleading in terms in favor of private investment for an independent activity. Okay. I mean, what Olivier said is that in France we do have catalogs. We have Gaumont, we have Petar, with an enormous concentration of French works. So those catalogs are not protected from being sold. That's all I'm saying. Now, Christian Braüer, and we will have to conclude this debate, and then we'll hand over back to Olivier because he is the timekeeper. You have required a specific support of the European Union for movie theaters. This is what you are asking for, because the theaters were very much jeopardized. There is another one, another place. It is the independent distribution. Films have been, the release has been postponed. There were restrictions that led to different measures, closing down of movie theaters, the fear of movie theaters, directors to open up, etc. Whereas in between, we have proved that this is a very safe place to be. So what is it that you would like Thierry Breton to do, Europe to do in the coming month in favor of movie theaters? Thank you very much, and thank you for saying that a theater, a movie theater, is a place, a safe place to be. And in France, culture really is symbolic, has a very big power. In Germany, culture is being used to to teach the public. And well, movie theaters are still still very very neglected. And again, the film broadcasters also suffered a lot, I must say. I mean, the whole economy in Germany has suffered, and movie theaters are really down. I mean, and even after the pandemic, we will have to, or well, we need to get prepared for the next waves, and then maybe we will have a lack of budget, etc., and we will be faced with new challenges like football, a World Cup, etc. So we really have a different situation. Maybe the pandemic will be over the day we will be able to take off our mask when sitting in a theater. In many countries, I don't know for France, but in many countries, we really have to redevelop our own profitability and competitivity. We need to develop our public, and it costs a lot of money. We need to educate people. We need to modernize, and we need to become green. We need to go digital, and it's not only the projector, I mean, you know, the tool itself. Everything has to become digital, and everything has to be supported, because the Art and Essai movie theaters, with their cultural commitment, do not have the possibilities and the financial means to do all that. However, I really appreciate what Odile said. Yes, we have to respect rules, and we have to be careful about rules, because it is the European Union which has to say what the rules are about. And in a few decades, we will look back and say how naive we have been, because we have the US on one side, we have China on the other side. Now we also to take our own initiatives. We have to become competitive, and we have to remain it. We have to be sustainable. We have to be turned green, independently from the two giants. This means that we need to develop new strategies, and also strategies to work together, to really work together. And it has to be supported at the European level. We are one network in European. And this is why it is so important to support associations and federations. I talked about that with Peter. Everywhere where we have those networks, theaters are better off, because they learn from each other, they support each other, etc. So this we need to invest in in how to become professionals. We have to become more international, without giving away any kind of European characters. This will make the strength in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
C'est ça. Vous pouvez...
Those of you who are online, you can put questions. I don't have any for the time being. Oh, yes. But first, before a Q&A session, with answers, I hope, I'd like to ask Olivier, what are your conclusions from this discussion, and what will France propose within the framework of its presidency, which is short, so we need to make a quick proposal. Thank you, Pascal. Well, first of all, coming back to what Sidonie said, the best way, of course, to defend our strategic objectives is to have sound companies and to help them to be in good shape. Production companies, movie theaters, distributors, and so on. So that's what we are trying to do. In France, with a strong political will, for 70 years now to have a system where we support the industry, but let's not be naive. A sound company, that's also grounds for it to be bought out. Pascal spoke about Microsoft with its buyout of video games. The company was in great shape and very expensive, but that didn't prevent it from being bought out. Coming back to France, the directive and investment requirements have a systemic impact on the soundness and solvency of video production markets. So from one day to the next, it guarantees 200 million euros in additional revenue for audiovisual production companies and 50 million in additional orders for movie production companies. So making it solvent makes production companies even more desirable on the market. In the audiovisual sector, there are companies in great shape, and over the past 12 or 18 months, there have been investments leading to a total or partial takeover by American funds. Within look at Europa Core, that was a majority stake that was taken over. Other European capital has been injected in production companies. It's not because you're in great shape that you are protected from being taken over by extra European capital. We're well placed to say this because you may know that we were not, well, production companies whose voting rights were held by extra European capital. So extra European capital is now talking to the CNC saying if we invest so much, we'll still have incentives. So we have a good observation status. And we know the dynamism of this industry. And the fact that the production market is more and more solvent with the investment obligations giving ideas to many European players. After a long reaction, I would like to come back to the issue. It's not because a company is doing well that it is protected from being bought out or taken over by non-Europeans. Now, what makes us feel more at ease in what I presented earlier is that when we tried to set up this initial protection mechanism of catalogs to the law of the 25th of October last, we've seen our European friends grasping the idea, and we're happy to see that the last two presidencies of the European Union, our Portuguese friends with whom we have strong dialogue because of a national Portuguese film center that is very dynamic, and our Slovenian friends. Well, these presidencies of the EU placed in the findings, the conclusions of the EU Council and of the councils of education and culture, they inserted the notion of strategic assets. This is not something that France was taken out of a hat now. This is something that started with the Portuguese and Slovenian presidencies, and that is very important. So, notwithstanding the measures to be taken today, what we can point out is that if there's no legislative initiative, we would be at a loss. The initiative, should it be a revision of the primary laws of treaties or extend the implementing law of 2019 that I referred to earlier, that must be discussed between the member states. That can only come from the Commission, right? The commissioner whom we heard earlier, yes, absolutely. But Margaret de Stager had made clear statements on that a long time ago, and several times, and in particular during the pandemic. So it would be logical for the Commission to take the legislative initiative that would, of course, be supported by France. So with the start of a legislative initiative, what about the conclusions of the French presidency of the European Union that will be presented to the Council? It should talk about the importance of this. Olivier, I didn't have any questions before. I have a very precise question this time. Yes. If the catalogue of studios, Canal, were bought by shareholder Bolloré, we'll have to control that to not be passed on to the highest bidder without any cultural objectives. What do we do then, Olivier? That's the question. It's not my question. That is the question. But it is a big question, right? It depends to whom it's transferred. If it is within the Union, no problem. And in France, because as we pointed out earlier, in France, we're highly protected because producers have an obligation. So there's no issue that is in France or in Europe. But if it is taken over by extra-European capital, as I pointed out at the start, we are at a loss. In the next 2 weeks, we'll have this mechanism imposing a prior notice of 6 months. You can't issue a directive in 6 months. Oh, no, that's too complicated. But at any rate, in 2 weeks' time, it will be before the Council on the 8th of February. I hope the decree will be signed by the Prime Minister before the 15th. So we will have a prior notice period of 6 months, giving us time to think, and the possibility of requiring some guarantees from the buyer. We cannot block the acquisition, and that is not the goal once again, because we have to analyze things on a case-by-case basis. But the mechanism, anyway, will become effective. 2 questions for Odile to a large extent. Why should we be wary of investment funds in third countries? Aren't they necessary to reinforce finances in companies in the sector? And secondly, about video games, it's a culture. We have a lot of buyouts by Chinese or American funds. Couldn't that challenge the European imaginary? 2 questions for you. Well, to answer the first question, it's unfortunate that you have only international funds today. It would be better to have private European capital investing. But it's not a good idea to close the door on foreigners. Competition is always very good on the market. But I think it would be good to be able to strengthen European players in general. And in France, with DPI, you have very good private initiatives to support the private sector. But it's very much French. It's good, we are in the lead, but in European countries, it doesn't exist as yet. And it may be a chance to learn from each other in Europe. To answer the second question, it was what? About the buyout by American companies or Chinese companies. Couldn't that jeopardize the creation of an European imaginary? Yes. I think by reinforcing producers, it leaves them their creative and artistic independence, and that's important. Clearly, a non-European group buying a producer and obligating or demanding international creation, two Chinese or two American. That won't work. I've been in the video game sector for years. I've led major production studios. Now, artists, when they don't like what you ask them to do, they leave at the same time. So there is a risk. of impoverishing European artistic direction if you have only European capital. But I still strongly believe in artistic freedom and the freedom of artists who can leave and set up their own companies. That is what has been done a lot today. We see startups, not necessarily young startups. These are people who developed video games for large companies for 20 years, and now they have decided that they want to make their vision happen. And for me, that is the future of our future capital. Instead of talking too much about past catalog, let's talk about future catalogs and brands that will be set up by these young, talented people. How can we keep them in Europe? I have another question. To protect studios and movie theaters, isn't the solution a matter of mixing massive private capital and protect that investment that will not be only for the benefit of American funds? A while ago you spoke about the tax credit and the CNC support fund, but there's a third fund, public service investments. And there are works with only public funds, almost. Are they protected? But there's another way of protecting works through financial support or public funds invested by public services, right? I'm asking you, Olivier, take the microphone. Absolutely. But over the long term, you know that the public service doesn't have any rights over the works in question. They're held by producers. So that's a system that we wanted to have to ensure the independence of the producer with respect to even public broadcasters, any broadcaster. So the question of catalog is still relevant, even though the dynamism of public orders has a role to play for sound production companies and therefore on production and catalogs. So that's an ambitious answer, Olivier. So thank you for this discussion. I think it was very interesting. We now have a better understanding of what France wanted to do and what it put on the table for Europe. And the starting point is that you managed to have it voted by the French Parliament with this regulation, as you announced, Olivier, which will soon be improved upon or entirely transposed by the decree that is now before the Council of State in France. So thanks to everyone. I'd like to thank the CNC for hosting this debate. Thank you.